After Grandpa Ivan Sergeyevich's funeral, I stumbled upon his old savings passbook. Mom tossed it straight into the bin, dismissing it as junk. "We should have buried it with him," she declared. Silently, I retrieved the book and headed to the bank. The director's face went pale. "Immediately call the police and stay here. And before we proceed, please write down which country you are from and how old you are. Enjoy listening." On the day Ivan Sergeyevich was laid to rest, the city seemed to fall silent. Not in a literal sense. Cars still rumbled by, people hurried along, and trams creaked around corners, but for Vera Ivanovna, everything around her felt muffled, as if someone had draped the world in a thick quilt. Sounds were present but distant, sights hazy, as if viewed through smudged glass. Grandpa had lived a long, unassuming life, atypical of those who prefer to remain in the background. He rarely spoke of himself, never complained, and never boasted. He worked, as he put it, honestly and according to schedule. Vera remembered his hands, broad, strong, always clean, yet calloused, as if he'd handled metal, not just papers. After the funeral, she and her mother returned to his apartment. Nina Petrovna led the way, her steps heavy but firm. She always took the lead. Upon crossing the threshold, she immediately launched into action as if no loss had occurred. Only tasks, tasks, and more tasks. "Well," she said, removing her headscarf, "it's time to sort through this. No point keeping all this junk." The word junk landed with a sting, implying Grandpa himself was merely a pile of discarded possessions. Vera quietly placed her bag on a stool in the entryway. The apartment carried a dry scent of old books, aged wood, and perhaps a hint of something medicinal. On the kitchen counter sat a mug with a spoon, a testament to Grandpa's unfinished moment. Vera's gaze lingered on the mug, but her mother was already opening cupboards. "Oh, so many papers," Nina Petrovna grumbled. "Bills, receipts, who needs this stuff?" Vera had always been accommodating. She never argued, never raised her voice. At work she was a librarian, a sanctuary of quietude, neat shelves, and readers who offered hushed gratitude. At home there was her mother, loud and sharp-tongued, and a daughter who lived far away and called when she could. Vera had grown accustomed to being a buffer, a listener here, a silent presence there, a compromiser in between. She walked into the room where Grandpa kept his documents. An old chest of drawers stood by the window, usually topped with a pile of newspapers, just in case. Vera pulled open the top drawer. It contained envelopes neatly tied with string, small notebooks, a few Soviet-era photographs, and nestled among them, a thin, worn booklet with a grey-green cover, a savings passbook. Vera picked it up, tracing the name embossed on the cover, Gromov Ivan Sergeyevich. The bank stamp was faded, ancient. Vera remembered seeing such passbooks in her youth when she accompanied her mother to Sberbank. "Mom," she called out, "Grandpa's Sberkas passbook is here." Nina Petrovna appeared swiftly, her expression one of annoyance. "You're bothering me again." She glanced briefly, not even taking the book. "What is that?" She grimaced. "Just throw it out." "It's old junk. You should have buried it with Grandpa so you wouldn't have to deal with it." Without waiting for a reply, she snatched the passbook from Vera's outstretched hand and flung it into a trash bin in the corner. The passbook struck the rim and fell inside, landing on paper napkins. Vera froze, not because of money, she hadn't expected anything to be left, but because the gesture felt so utterly final, as if Grandpa himself were just trash to be discarded so life could move on. "Mom," Vera said softly. "Why?" "Oh, don't start." Nina Petrovna waved a dismissive hand. "You always complicate things. You know how much paperwork these passbooks mean. Things are different now. Live in the present. Live in the present." It was a phrase her mother often used to avoid uncomfortable memories. And there were many uncomfortable memories in their family, unspoken and buried. Vera didn't respond. She walked to the bin, and while her mother turned to a cupboard, she retrieved the passbook, gently brushed off the crumbs as if apologizing, and placed it in her bag. Nina Petrovna noticed as they reached the entryway. "You're seriously going to carry that around?" She squinted. Vera, you're an adult woman. Why these fantasies? I'm just going to close the account, Vera said calmly, wanting to tie up loose ends. Just in case there's anything on it. Fine, go, her mother snapped irritably. But don't come crying later that you were cheated and wasted your time. Vera left without another word. That night, Vera barely slept. The passbook lay on her bedside table and she found herself staring at it like a foreign object that had somehow intruded into her life. The next morning, she went to the bank. It was a standard neighborhood branch, not new, but tidy. People in line waited patiently, some to pay utility bills, others to open accounts, and a few to complain about interest rates. Vera approached the counter where a young employee sat. "Hello," Vera said politely. "I'd like to inquire about a Spurkas passbook and close the account if it still exists." She handed over the book. The young woman took it, offered a practiced smile, and began flipping through the pages. Then her eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were reading something unexpected. She entered the details into the computer, looked back at the passbook, and then at the screen again. "One moment. Eat, please," she said, her smile gone. "I'll be right back." She stood up and disappeared into the back of the office. Vera initially paid it no mind, assuming old records might require manual searching, but minutes stretched into 5, then 10. The people around her changed. The queue moved. The young woman did not return. Finally, a man in a sharp suit, around 50 years old, approached Vera. His face was not angry, but exceptionally composed, like that of someone accustomed to maintaining control, even when their world is in turmoil. "Vera Ivanovna?" he inquired. "Yes, I am Alexei Mikhailovich, the branch director. Please, come with me to my office." Vera felt a chill creep into her fingers. "Is something wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's sort this out calmly," he said, gesturing her forward. Inside the office, he offered her a seat, placed the passbook on his desk, and aligned it with meticulous care, as if it were not mere paper, but compelling evidence. "Tell me, please," Alexei Mikhailovich began, "what was your relationship to Ivan Sergeyevich Gromov?" "He was my grandfather," Vera replied. "He passed away recently. I am his granddaughter." "My condolences," he nodded, then continued unexpectedly. "Were you aware of this passbook?" "No, I found it yesterday." The man's gaze lingered on the cover, as if verifying her statement. Then he looked up. "Vera Ivanovna, you have done nothing wrong, but I need you to remain here and not leave until further notice." "Why?" Vera was flustered. I just wanted to close the account." Alexei Mikhailovich leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "I am about to instruct that the police be called. This is a mandatory procedure, you understand. Not because of you, but because of the document." Vera's vision darkened. "The police," she repeated, almost a whisper. "For what?" "Because this Spurkas passbook has been on an internal review list since the early 2000s. Its appearance signifies that the matter has been reopened." He pressed a button on his phone and spoke curtly to his secretary. "Call the police and instruct the officers at the entrance that the individual with this passbook is to remain here until cleared." Politely. Vera sat as if glued to her chair. She wanted to stand, to leave, to say, "Excuse me, I didn't know." But the director's calm demeanor told her arguing was futile. The police arrived quickly, not with sirens, but with a business-like efficiency. And but 2 men, one younger, one older. They checked Vera's passport, asked where she found the book when her grandfather died, and who else had been in the apartment. "Vera Ivanovna," the elder officer said, "you are not a suspect, but we need to document the emergence of this document." "I don't understand anything," Vera confessed. "You see," he replied, "sometimes old stories resurface when everyone has forgotten them." When she was allowed to go home, Vera felt drained. She walked down the street thinking, "My God, something happened in our family, and we lived as if nothing had." At home, Nina Petrovna met her in the kitchen, already annoyed. "Well," she snapped, "didn't I tell you it was junk?" Vera silently removed her coat, hung it up, and walked to the table. "Mom, they called the police at the bank." Nina Petrovna froze, then as if struck on the head. "What are you talking about?" she asked sharply. Vera recounted everything briefly, without melodrama, but as she spoke, her mother grew paler. "It can't be," Nina Petrovna whispered, her gaze drifting away as if Grandpa were standing there. "Ivan, he was so quiet. What would he know?" "Mom, do you know something?" Vera asked. Her mother spun around abruptly. "I don't know anything," she cut her off. "And you don't need to know. Understand? It's all nonsense. Your grandfather might have misplaced a paper somewhere. Anything could have happened back then." Vera looked at her intently and for the first time in years thought, she's not lying because she's bad, but because she's scared. The following days were strange. Vera received calls from the bank and the police asking for clarification. Once a local officer visited to see where Vera lived, who she lived with, and if she felt threatened. It was both humiliating and terrifying. Then, the subtle incidents began, preventing her from finding peace. One evening, returning from the library, Vera noticed an unfamiliar man loitering near her building entrance. He seemed to be smoking, but his cigarette wasn't lit. He glanced at her, then quickly looked away, as if not wanting to be noticed. Another time, she heard faint rustling sounds at her apartment door. She approached. Silence. She opened it. No one was there. But on the doormat lay a small, unsigned slip of paper. "Don't interfere." Vera showed the note to her mother. Nina Petrovna turned pale and immediately flew into a rage. "It's just hooligans. Kids from the neighborhood. Why are you making such a fuss?" But her hands were trembling. A week later, Vera saw Alexei Mikhailovich again. He had called and asked her to come to the branch. "I'm not permitted to tell you everything," he said when they met. "But I can tell you the main thing. Your grandfather was not a fraud. On the contrary, he was someone who tried to stop what was happening." "What was happening?" Vera asked quietly. Alexei Mikhailovich sighed and remained silent for a long moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "In the early 2000s, a scheme operated in our city, simple and terrifying. Sums of money were channeled through the accounts of ordinary people. Those who didn't ask questions were chosen. Sometimes accounts were opened without their consent. Sometimes papers were slipped to them. Then, these individuals became scapegoats. Cases were opened against them, while the real organizers disappeared." Vera listened, feeling a coldness rise within her. "And my grandfather, your grandfather, he happened to be in the vicinity. He worked at an enterprise where payments were being processed. He noticed discrepancies and raised the issue. Then he was offered silence." "He was silent his whole life," Vera said softly. "He never even told us anything." "Precisely, but he did one thing," Alexei Mikhailovich said, pointing to the Spurkas passbook. "He left a trace. The money in that account isn't savings. It's what they intended to transfer out but didn't quite manage. The account was frozen, and your grandfather kept the passbook as insurance. As long as he had it, no one dared to touch him because he could come to the bank and cause a scene." "So," Vera swallowed, "so now that he's dead, someone hoped the passbook would be discarded." "Yes," the director confirmed calmly, "and he was very surprised when you brought it in." Vera left the bank and stood by the entrance for a long time, hesitant to go home. Her grandfather, quiet and unassuming, had carried such a burden his entire life without telling a soul. And she had always thought of him as merely a humble, hard-working veteran. She began to recall how Grandpa never liked discussions about money at home, how he couldn't stand idle chatter and would always shut down the topic with the phrase, "It's none of our business." How he never kept large sums of cash at home and always kept documents in one place. How he always checked the windows and doors before leaving, and how he had taught Vera never to sign anything on the go. Vera remembered another incident. She was young, just starting at the library. One day, two men in dark coats visited Grandpa. They sat in the kitchen, drinking tea. Grandpa spoke little, while the men smiled constantly. Vera hadn't paid it much mind then, but after they left, Grandpa sat by the window in silence for a long time, and then he told her, "If anyone asks about me, say I'm a simple man. That's all. A simple man." He repeated this throughout his life. Gradually, other people became involved in the investigation. Vera received a call from a woman at the police department, an investigator, calm and professional. "Vera Ivanovna," she said, "we need to understand who might have known about the passbook. Besides your grandfather, your mother, your grandmother, any acquaintances?" "My mother called it junk," Vera replied cautiously. But judging by her reaction, she seemed to know something. Vera decided to speak with her mother honestly, without accusation or anger, just to ask. That evening, she sat Nina Petrovna at the table and poured her tea. "Mom," Vera said, "did you know Grandpa had problems?" Nina Petrovna immediately tensed. "What problems?" she asked dryly. "Don't pretend. You were scared when you heard about the police? You knew." Her mother remained silent for a long time, then abruptly, as if she couldn't help herself, said, "I knew." Vera froze and remained silent. "And what was I supposed to do?" Nina Petrovna suddenly burst out. "Those were different times. Be thankful we survived at all. Your grandfather stuck his nose where it didn't belong once, and we lived like we were walking on pins and needles for a year. He'd come home and just be silent, but he'd jump at every noise at night. And I had you, so little. Was I supposed to be some kind of hero?" "Mom," Vera said softly, "why didn't you tell me?" Nina Petrovna turned away. "Because you're so quiet. You would have gotten scared. You would have told everyone. You wouldn't have been able to handle it. And he wanted you to live a normal life." Vera found it hard to breathe, not from anger, but from understanding. Grandpa hadn't been silent because he didn't care, but because he was trying to protect them. After that conversation, her mother changed. Not softer, no, but quieter. Something seemed to settle within her. Events unfolded slowly, but surely, and the police unearthed archives, found old case files, names, leads. Several former bank employees were summoned for questioning. One individual attempted to flee, but was apprehended at the airport. Another suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized. A third began calling the bank, demanding his money back, though officially he had no connection to the account. One day, Alexei Mikhailovich was called to a meeting at the head office. He called Vera that evening. "Vera Ivanovna," he said, his voice tired. "You must understand they may try to pressure you. Don't answer calls from unknown numbers. Don't agree to meetings. And if anyone suggests they can resolve this amicably, call the investigator immediately." "I'm scared," Vera admitted honestly. "I understand, but you've already done the most important thing, that you didn't throw away the passbook." Vera hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. One thought spun in her head. If I had listened to Mom, if I had really thrown it away. And then, for the first time, she felt a strange sense of pride. Not for the money, but for the realization that Grandpa had been stronger than he appeared, and she, the accommodating one, had managed to defy her habit. A few months later, Vera was invited back to the bank, this time officially. In the office sat the investigator, the director, and two individuals from the head office. The investigator placed a folder in front of Vera. "Vera Ivanovna, the investigation into the old case has been reopened. A decision has been made regarding your account. The funds are recognized as not being the proceeds of criminal activity in your capacity, and the seizure is lifted. However, there are nuances." "What nuances?" Vera asked, her heart pounding. "The funds will be dispersed only after the decision takes effect, and a portion of the sum will go towards compensation for the victims, those who were truly framed back then and have proven it." Vera unexpectedly exhaled with relief. "That's right," she said. Everyone looked at her with surprise. "My grandfather, he would have wanted it that way," Vera added. "That same evening," she told her mother. Nina Petrovna listened silently, without interruption. When Vera finished, her mother suddenly said softly, "Ivan, he could have just stayed quiet back then and lived peacefully, but he couldn't. He had a conscience." Vera nodded. "And now," Nina Petrovna continued, you also didn't stay quiet. There was no theatrical praise in her voice, but for Vera, it was more meaningful than any accolade. The most significant change began later, not at the bank or in the police station, but within Vera herself. She suddenly realized that she had lived her entire life as if her voice meant nothing, as if it were easier to yield than to explain, as if peace meant staying silent. But Grandpa, it turned out, was outwardly calm, yet internally possessed a core of steel. Vera began to change her habits, small but important ones. At work, she stopped apologizing for every minor thing, stopped agreeing to things that weren't hers. But you can do it. At the library, she started leading a discussion group for seniors, reading aloud, discussing books, and people gravitated towards her. Some said, "It's so good you came up with this." And Vera, for the first time, didn't feel embarrassed. The money, when it was finally transferred, Vera didn't spend ostentatiously. She settled her mother's old debts, those Nina Petrovna had never asked for, but which hung like a heavy burden. She paid for renovations in Grandpa's apartment to rent it out officially and have a steady income supplement. A portion she set aside for her daughter, not for a wedding, but simply as a safety net. And another portion, unexpectedly, she transferred to a fund assisting people who had found themselves in difficult situations and had become scapegoats in other schemes. Nina Petrovna, upon learning this, initially grumbled, "There you go again with your kindness." But a few days later, she brought Vera an old framed photograph of Grandpa from a cupboard. "Put it out," she said curtly. "He earned it." In the spring, Vera went to the cemetery. It was quiet there, smelling of damp earth and last year's leaves. She cleared away the grass, adjusted the wreath, and wiped the photo on the monument. "Grandpa," she said aloud, though no one was around. "I didn't know. Forgive me, but I understand now." She stood for a moment, then added, "You didn't stay silent in vain, but you didn't leave a trace in vain either. You protected us, and I will try not to be so accommodating where I need to be alive." She returned home a different person, not loud, not defiant, but internally steady, much like Grandpa, this calm on the outside and strong within. And when Nina Petrovna once again tried to give her habitual commands that evening, "Do this, don't do that," Vera, for the first time, answered gently but firmly, "Mom, I'll decide myself." Nina Petrovna looked at her for a long time, then unexpectedly nodded and said, "All right, decide." It was a quiet, almost imperceptible reconciliation, and perhaps the most important inheritance of all, because money runs out, papers get lost, but a sense of self-worth, once found, remains. Ivan Sergeyevich lived his life so that no one suspected the weight he carried, and Vera Ivanovna lived half her life as if her words held no significance. But one worn document, tossed in the trash and retrieved from the bin, changed everything. It revealed the truth, restored justice, and most importantly, it helped her finally choose herself, and that proved far more valuable than any numbers in an account.